Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 100 lightning infused dexterity build. So we're going to be using Cleanrot Knight Swords in each hand, and we're going to be putting 45 points into vigor, 25 into endurance, 60 into dexterity, and then everything else is just the base stats that I had for my vagabond class. So that's the way I recommend setting this up. You could switch some points from dexterity into vigor if you want something a little bit more tanky, especially because we're not going to be using any of the vigor boosting talismans. We're going to be swapping around between a couple different weapons for this build. So I have 3 Cleanrot Knight Swords. Because these are farmable, you can really get as many as you want and use as many different Ashes of Wars as you want. But my setup is going to be using Quick Step in the offhand, and then either Thunderbolt or Storm Stomp in the right hand. And then I'll also use a Misericorde as well as a Buckler for parries and crits. I'll also switch to the Jar Cannon occasionally. This can be a useful tool for just applying pressure at range or if somebody's near a ledge, but it's definitely not going to be necessary. I just like to use it sometimes. Because we're less likely to stagger our opponent, I think it's pretty important to have a decent amount of poise. So I went for the 93 poise breakpoint, and this armor setup nets us 95 poise, which is going to be very solid. And we're going to be using the Raging Wolf Helm, the Banished Knight Armor, Bullgoat Gauntlets, Bullgoat Greaves, and then the Bullgoat's Talisman to get to that poise breakpoint. And then we're also going to require the Great Jar's Arsenal just so that we have the extra equip load boost that's necessary to equip all this stuff at the same time. The last 2 talismans I'm going to be using are going to be the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, which boosts attack power with successive attacks, and then the Spear Talisman, which boosts counter attacks with thrusting weapons. Since both these swords are thrusting type weapons, they're going to benefit from this anytime we get a counter attack. I'll swap around this first talisman. Sometimes I'll use a Blessed talisman to boost my HP over time, and then Shard of Alexander is going to be useful if I want to go for more Ashes of War, but I didn't find it too necessary. The Lightning Bolt Ash of War is already going to do quite a bit of damage, and then maybe just the Crimson Seed talisman if I want to heal and I only have a few heals left. And then the Claw Talisman is also a good choice if you think you're going to be going for jumping attacks. I'd like to mention that this is a little less tanky of a build than I've used in the past, and you could set this up to use the Crimson Amber Medallion to boost your HP, or the Erd Tree's Favor +2 instead of the Bullgoat Talisman. So you'd lose out on poise, you'd be at 71, which is also a good breakpoint, but it's not quite as high as the 93 breakpoint that we're going for. So totally optional to be a little bit more tanky, but I found that my playstyle and my setup worked well with higher poise and a little less HP. As for the tiers that I'd recommend, I use the Crimson Bubble tier as well as the Lightning Shroud and Crack tier. The Lightning Shroud and Crack tier lasts for quite a while and boosts your lightning based damage, which is going to be really useful since everything we're using is lightning infused. And the Crimson Bubble tier is going to be helpful just as a way to prevent yourself from dying. It boosts your HP when you get close to death, so that saved my life quite a few times. You could switch this up for the Thorny Crack tier, which will scale with the Rotten Sword Insignia tier because it's going to make consecutive attacks grow stronger. So that's an option, but I definitely recommend the Crimson Bubble tier. The main thing to be aware of with this moveset is going to be your ability to stagger your opponents. So running R2s are going to be really nice, and also jumping L1s are also going to be really nice. I believe the running R2 has a 101 poise breakpoint, so that's going to stagger most people unless they have hyper armor or quite a lot of poise. And then the jumping L1, if all these connect, will also do a lot of poise damage. So you're going to want to make sure that you're not just spamming your L1 attacks, because you're not really going to stagger your opponent very often and you'll likely lose out on some trades. The way that I use the Ashes of War with this setup would be to pressure with L1s, jumping L1s, and heavy attacks when my opponents were close, and then if they got low on health or if they were playing passively, I'd try to punish them with Thunderbolt Ash of War since it has really good tracking and they may not be expecting it. It's also pretty easy to punish poorly timed heals, so if your opponent rolls once or twice away from you and you don't follow them closely, they might think they have enough time to heal, but this comes out quick enough usually to get rid of that last HP, so I found that to be a nice way to finish them. If I was being attacked by multiple opponents, I'd usually switch to my Storm Stomp sword. This would be great to kind of diffuse some of the tension in the fight, slow them down a little bit, and it also guarantees either at least one L1 or an R2. So both of those are great options. They do decent damage, and if you can switch between these weapons pretty quickly, then you'll be able to punish them as they roll away, and then punish them quickly as they get close. So definitely good options there. I really like this setup, but there are other Ashes of War that work with these weapons that are also powerful. I think Horaloser Shaker is also an option that would be great for stunning multiple opponents and doing quite a bit of damage in the process. Lastly, in my offhand, I had the Quick Step. I found this pretty useful in one-on-one situations, or if somebody was using something like Moonveil, which is really easy to quick step backstab. So that's how I use this. I didn't really integrate it too much into my playstyle, just for like added iframes. It can be a nice option, like if somebody's rot breathing you or something, but for me, I just found it nice for going for crit attacks, mostly in one-on-one situations. The moveset for this is going to be pretty standard. It's just the dual thrusting sword moveset, so you're going to have very solid L1 chains. It's unlikely you'll get the full chain, and it also does require quite a bit of stamina, so that's just something to be aware of, is decent stamina management. And then it's going to have just pretty normal thrusting attacks for pretty much all your attacks, so running heavies, running lights, running L1s. Jumping attacks you're probably going to want to delay. It's easy to miss the first couple if you just immediately press L1 after your jump, so I usually like to come down a little bit and then start, because a hitbox can easily go over their head if you aren't on an incline or something. And then I also liked the reverse back step L1 quite a bit. I found that to be pretty solid and good for roll catches. And yeah, that's the majority of the moveset. It's going to be just pokes for the most part, and they're solid, but their hitbox is not going to have too much horizontal range. So something like dual straight swords are going to be a little bit better in that department, since you need to make sure that you're lined up pretty well with your opponent. Otherwise, you might not hit them. That just about covers everything I wanted to go over for how to set up this build, and let's go ahead and just jump into the invasions. So this first invasion I thought was pretty funny. It started out with me actually being AFK. I walked away from my controller while I was invading, which I don't really recommend, but I got there just in time. They didn't kill me, and only got a couple hits in, so I was kind of starting off on my back foot for this. And normally I'd use the iframes at the beginning of spawning in to drink my physic or something, but in this case I just kind of needed to make sure I didn't die. And they eventually gave me a little bit of space, so I got my physic and started just kind of getting set up here. I used the Thunderbolt Ash of War. It's kind of a nice play to use it on one person and then switch to another. Usually they think that you'll stay tracked on to the first person, and then you'll kind of catch the second person off guard, and you'll just chip damage both of them. It does usually do, at least 400 damage, so that's pretty awesome for something that comes out so quick. It scales off dexterity, so you really just have a great option for a dexterity build there. Eventually they go for a butt stomp, which is pretty funny. I don't usually see that in PvP. So I'm able to get a backstab, and then I switch up to the storm stomp Ash of War, which is good for just guaranteeing an attack. And they start going for some pretty predictable roll attacks, and I pull out my parry shield and just get a quick riposte. So that was a nice turnaround from starting out AFK to getting some nice crit kills. Next up we have something that's, kind of a good transition. They're AFK at the beginning rather than me this time, but I still end up pretty much cornered and getting hit by some heavy damage dealing Ash of Wars, so that's a little bit scary. I am not really sure how to approach this initially because they're staying pretty close together. The Lion's Claw Ash of War is great for getting backstabs on, so I'm going for those a little bit, and then trying to discourage their passive play by using Thunderbolt. I really like that as a tool to just get players to be a little bit more aggressive and maybe make some mistakes when they are being more aggressive. I'm also noticing that they're not doing a ton of damage with their hits, which is great, but they do eventually pull out the Rot Breath. I'm not sure if that's here or just a little bit later, but it definitely changes the pacing of the fight. They're not following me at all, so that's something I'm aware of. They're really just staying away from any PvE and trying to maintain their position inside this little cave area. And they've also got some incantations to boost their health, so I'm trying to punish that with Thunderbolt, just making sure that they don't have too much time and space. I'd say that's really a key way to approach fights like this, especially if you have an Ash of War like Thunderbolt or just some sort of ranged attack. Just make sure that they don't get too much extra time and space. So I eventually fall off the ledge. I don't think they're going to follow me because there's PvE down here, so I go for just a tactic to regain some of the HP that I've lost. What I first do is switch over to something that boosts my faith, and then switch over to a Claw Mark Seal just so I can use Bestial Vitality. And then while Bestial Vitality is working for me, it's kind of slow, so I start using the Jar Cannon. I find this to be a decent tactic because I'm getting HP back while chipping them, so it's kind of a decent play, I think, to get some HP back for myself while chipping them. And eventually I do come back since I feel like they're out of range of the Jar Cannon, and I'm going for some more backstabs on the Lion's Claw attack. I pretty much do that every time. I just think it's such a good opportunity to get a backstab. The recovery frames for the Lion's Claw Ash of War just take quite a while, so it can be a good way to practice your spacing and timing when it comes to crit attacks. And then they do take out a Cypher, so I hard swap to a Buckler and just go for a parry because I find that their running attacks are pretty easy to parry. So now it's just a one-on-one, and at this point I switch back to the dual thrusting swords, and I'm just kind of letting them go for their greatsword attacks. I'm not really too worried at this point since I have 4 heals and have done quite a bit of chip damage. And then I also switched to my quick-step sword since this is a good weapon to quick-step backstab against. The long recovery time for each swing is pretty solid. If they were going for crouch pokes, I think I would try to avoid that a little bit, but in this case they're just going for mostly the regular R1 attacks, so I'm not too worried. Eventually they do maybe one too many R1 attacks and I'm able to backstab it. Don't really need the quick step there. And then that's something I like to do, is to just walk away a little bit so they think they have the space to heal and then come in with a running attack. That usually is pretty effective. This next invasion is going to be a nice example of just negotiating 3 different players at the same time, especially in an area with no PvE. So I'm going to be focusing really on my spacing and my timing here. If I get caught by too many people at the same time, I'll definitely get blendered. So I'm trying to avoid that. It starts out just as a 2v1, but then a third summon comes in, and I'm just trying to chip them for the most part. The L1 chain for this is going to be very strong and useful for burst damage, but it's difficult to get the space necessary to get the full chain off. And it's also difficult to know if they're going to roll away from it or continue to be aggressive. So if they continue to be aggressive and just eat the full L1 chain, then they're probably going to die, but it's always a little bit of a risk. So this can give you time if you're just rolling away from attacks, getting in a couple L1s or just quick attacks, to just try to understand their play style a little bit. If you run in too quickly and just get attacked immediately, you don't really have much of a feel for how they're going to play, how aggressive they're going to be. But if you dodge some, even if you have an opening for attacks, just to prolong the fight and get a feel for how everybody's going to play, it can be a nice way to understand their play and adjust to it. So that second Phantom had about half health, and I kind of realized at that point that they were going to be pretty aggressive, so I was able to get rid of their second half of their health with just an L1 chain, and that was pretty useful in terms of just delaying my attacks, trying to understand them, and then utilizing the knowledge that I gained in just kind of that short period of time. So now it's down to a 2v1, which is still a little bit scary. They've got Rivers of Blood, but they are very aggressive, so for that second Phantom there, I get quite a bit of health down with just a couple L1 chains, and then finish them off with the Thunderbolt, utilizing the extra range that you get and the great tracking. So using that as a mix-up, just maybe at a time when they're not expecting it, or if they have low health, can be very strong. I think they're used to getting attacked by your L1s, so they're not really spacing according to the Thunderbolt attack, and it will usually finish people off if they have a quarter of their health left. So I do finally get it down to just a 1v1 situation, and this person has dual scythes, which can be a little bit scary. They've got blood loss build up on it, and they're switching to that Reduvia, which has a ranged blood loss attack, so it's a little bit scary. But I am trying to keep an eye on my blood loss buildup and just make sure that I don't get too much at once. So it's getting a little high here, but they're going for heals and so am I. So I feel a little bit comfortable, and once it's down to a one-on-one situation, you have a lot more control of the fight. You can adjust to a lot more, and typically if you're a menace in invasions, once it's a duel type situation, you're gonna be set up pretty well. I am switching up between just a single quick step attack to the dual L1, and then there's a blue that comes in, so I think I should just finish off my opponent with Thunderbolt, because taking on a blue after a 3v1 can be a little bit difficult. This next 2v1 is a pretty good example of how to counter wizards with this build. So using Thunderbolt is going to be really helpful just because it gives you a ranged attack, and especially if they're trying to perform a spell, you can usually come out with yours as quickly or quicker than the spell that they're trying to perform. And then once it's down to a 1v1, my opponent is going to switch over to Moonveil, which is obviously pretty strong, but using Quick Step as a counter is probably even stronger, since the recovery frames for the Moonveil are a little bit longer than some other attacks, so I'm able to get a Quick Step backstab there and just take care of that host. This next invasion was probably a good example of just playing it kind of slowly. These two opponents both have katanas and look to be like wizards, so I'm assuming that they're both using Moonveil. So if that's the case, I'm usually a little bit more cautious, and I'm trying to use this pillar to just space a little bit, get rid of their bubble tier, and really kind of figure out how I want to approach this situation. Sometimes just backing off a little bit is a good idea, just until you have a plan if you're not fully confident about going into the situation. So I do switch over to Storm Stomp and then Quick Step, and there you can see again that Quick Step is just a really good counter to Moonveil. You get that Quick Step backstab without too much of an issue. Unfortunately, that Phantom only had like 500 HP, so that wasn't too bad. And then I get another backstab off of that Ash of War, which really requires some pressure of other people to be more effective. And then this wizard kind of had a high intelligence move here. They go into a very narrow spot that's actually challenging for a reason I wasn't really expecting. So they get a couple good hits on me, but don't continue to pressure, which is probably their biggest mistake. But I switch back over to Storm Stomp, which I think will be pretty useful in this situation. But I'm having a really hard time getting my camera right. I was trying to lock on, but then also moving backwards, which meant my camera would face the wrong direction, and then I'd press lock on again. And it was kind of a big issue in that second time it came out. But the third time, I finally had a good plan. I wasn't going to lock on until I was like midway down that little pathway, and then use Storm Stomp to just knock them out of any attack animations and use the thrusting swords to just finish them off. This next invasion I posted recently on my channel, so feel free to skip to about the 19-minute mark, and that'll go up to the next one. But this was a 2v1 in kind of a tight space, and here I was trying to flex a little bit. So I killed the first Phantom without much of a problem, and the host is just left. So I pull out my parry shield because I know that I want to go for a parry, but I have to wait for kind of the opportune moment. It's definitely not going to help you if you just kind of spam the parry and hope for the best. Usually you want to kind of understand their attack patterns a little bit, so go for some dodges, go for some baits with your hits, and then wait for a good time to use your parry. And then in this case, I timed it right with the parry, and then had a nice full weapon swap with the Misericorde. Next, we have a nice example of utilizing the Thunderbolt Ash of War as well as hard swaps and critical attacks. So here I'm swapping over to my parry shield. I'm assuming that I'm going to go for a parry at some point, and I'm also trying to utilize the poise damage that comes with the heavy running attack for the Cleanrot Knight Sword, which it does come out, I think, at a 101 poise damage, so most people will not be able to poise through it unless they're in a state of hyper armor or just really are stacking poise. So I try to use that to my advantage. I noticed that the Phantom is not afraid to free aim their attack, which implies that they might be a little bit stronger of an opponent than just your average co-opper. So I definitely respect that. They do manage to get me with it early on once, but I'm kind of aware that they're going to free aim it, so I time my rolls a little bit better. And here you can see that I'm just able to get quite a bit of chunk of health down with the Thunderbolt. I almost finished them off with Fan Daggers, but get staggered by the host, so I'm still trying to get this Phantom down. They go for probably a poorly timed Ash of War, take some more damage, and then right when they're about to heal, I get them with the Thunderbolt attack again. So that was just a good example of utilizing it to continue to pressure your opponent, even if you're not right up in their face. They might think that they are safe, but the Thunderbolt has so much range and such good tracking that it's usually just a good way to get somebody when they're not expecting it and punish those heals. And then once it's just a 1v1, they're using the Claymore pretty effectively, taking advantage of the heavy attacks and varying their timing. I'm going for a lot of heavy running attacks, but ultimately I do get a parry off. I missed one predictive parry at first, but went for another, and that one was successful. And then as they roll away, I get them with the Thunderbolt. So that was just 2 Phantoms down with the Thunderbolt, and just a good way to continue to pressure with a little bit of range. Next up, we have another 2v1, but my opponents are both using lightning builds, which I thought was pretty cool. One thing I really like about the Thunderbolt attack is that it's a good way to see how much vigor somebody has. So if you know that you're going to hit around 400 and you can see that close to half of their health is gone, then you know that they're pretty squishy. But if only like a fifth of their health is gone, then they've got quite a lot of vigor, and you're going to have to approach the situation differently. Here I'm able to get a couple quick attacks in with the rapiers and then go for another Thunderbolt attack just to finish off their last bit of damage. And then I get a little bit annoyed with the amount of spell spam that I'm getting, so I switch to my parry shield with Carry and Retaliation. This is definitely nice if you get a feel for your opponent just using a lot of spells consistently, and then I'm able to combo that into just a single attack with the Cleanrot Knight Swords. So definitely an effective way to approach magic spam. That pretty much covers all the invasions that I wanted to do commentary for. Just to recap all the different kind of ideas about strategy that I learned for making this video, I'd say that you really want to take advantage of passive play or spell play with Thunderbolt, Ash of War. Switch up to the Storm Stomp Ash of War if people are going to be playing aggressively, and then utilize the Quick Step Ash of War for certain situations. So if you're being attacked with colossal weapons, if they're going for a lot of Lion Claw attacks, if they're going for a lot of jumping heavy attacks with like great swords or colossal weapons, you're going to be in a good spot to quick step backstab them or get a critical just from spacing appropriately. And then Moonveil is always a good one to go for with the quick step backstab. So I would say those are how you want to utilize the Ash of War in this particular build. And then don't be afraid to use the heavy attacks with just the single sword. I think there's some feeling that if you're going to be using a dual wield attack that you need to utilize both weapons all the time, spam L1 for everything, jump attacks, running attacks, just regular neutral attacks. But using the poise damage that you get from the running heavies or regular heavies or jumping heavies, there's going to be advantages to that, especially for a weapon which has dual wield attacks that are staggered. So having all that poise damage come out all at once rather than a jumping L1, which comes out in multiple hits, but you need most of them to connect for the poise damage to really be effective. That's something you want to keep in mind. So I found running heavies to be great. Maybe the most powerful aspect of this moveset, especially if you time them well with some L1 chains. So that's kind of the approach that I took with this. And then I also wanted to kind of up my hard swap game. So I tried to utilize some crit attacks, ravioli steps, just, make sure I'm sharp on all the kind of technical skills that a lot of more advanced PvP players are using. So that's my approach for this video. The hard swaps, the crit attacks are not going to be necessary to make this an effective build, but they definitely are good skills to hone if you want to be good at invasions long term, and if you're just trying to increase your skills like I am. So that was kind of my approach to this whole build, and I'll be trying new things as time goes on, and you know, just kind of learning from the different move sets that I'm trying out with this whole series. So yeah, thank you for watching, and just try to keep an eye out for those different strategies that I employ, and, you know, build your own strategies. Don't just take my word for it. There's always new creative ways to play this game, so there might be something you find that's totally effective and worth trying out. As always, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate everybody's support, all the people liking and subscribing, adding to watch time. It all really helps the channel grow, so I just wanted to say that I appreciate it. Also, if you do have any ideas for builds that you'd like to see or just new setups that you're interested in, definitely let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for new builds. There's a lot in Elden Ring, so something weird or something strange, I'm always happy to give it a try. Yeah, thanks so much. Bye-bye.